continuing on in our series. We're in Revelation chapter 17. This may be a two-part study from Revelation 17 and 18. The enemy unmasked. All right, sweetie, let's go. What do we got? Men of faith and prayer will be constrained to go forth with holy zeal, declaring the words which God gives them. The sins of Babylon will be laid open. The fearful results of enforcing the observances of the church by civil authority, the inroads of spiritualism, the stealthy but rapid progress of the papal power, all will be unmasked. By these solemn warnings, the people will be stirred. Thousands upon thousands will listen who have never heard words like these. You know, folk, when I go on speaking appointments like I did just recently, people will come up to me after a meeting and they'll say, you really are going to get yourself into trouble if you keep talking like that. And folk, my greatest concern is that the spirit of papal Rome will dwell in my heart. That's my greatest concern. Because papal Rome, let's face it, the religion is built on two things, and great controversy brings them out. It's built on a religion that says, I can save myself by my works. You see, I can save myself by trying to be good. That's what papal Rome says. The other thing papal Rome says is, I can be saved in my sins. You see? That's what I fear, folk. That's what I fear. I don't fear a system, but I fear that the spirit that controls that power, that controls that system, will be in my life. That I'm afraid of. That I'm afraid of. And I think we all need to be afraid that if anything becomes the authority in my life or in any of our lives, then we're in trouble. Then we're in trouble. All right, sweetie, next slide. Sweetie, I know you pushed to the next slide. Okay, I know. Keep going. This one's kind of done fancy, Tabitha. It's pretty fancy. Actually, you promise you won't tell anybody? I didn't do it. Does that surprise anybody? Reggie, does that surprise you? You don't have to tell me, Reggie. No, a lady in Missouri, I sent her the material and she put the slides, she made the slides real fancy for me. No, I'm not capable of that. Okay. Revelation 17 tells us about the whore that's cut down by heaven's judgments. Revelation 17:1 says, I will show unto thee the judgments of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. So we're introduced to this symbol of a whore. The whore is an apostate church. We read that, of course, in Isaiah 1:20 and 21. Jeremiah 3:6-8, Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 15 through 30. And in fact, the entire book, Old Testament book of Hosea, that comes right after Daniel, it's a story, of course, about the man Hosea, a prophet of God, who was told, go and marry this woman that's a prostitute. And it was an object lesson of the apostasy of God's people. So Gomer represented Israel in apostasy. Now, Revelation 17:3 tells us more about this woman. It says the whore commits blasphemy. And blasphemy is when somebody claims to be God or claims power to forgive sins. John 10, Mark 2. Revelation 17:4 says the whore is very wealthy, and the whore's name is Babylon. So those are some of the characteristics of the whore of Revelation 17. Next slide. The whore is a persecutor of people, Revelation 17:6. The whore's geographical location is an area of 7 hills, Revelation 17:9. The whore rises in the old world where nations and peoples have always been, Revelation 17:15. And the whore or apostate church is also the name of a famous city in the world. And that's what Revelation 17:18 declares. So all of these characteristics, we can arrive at a very sound conclusion as to who this church is that is going to suffer the judgments of heaven. Next slide. Let's see. Now, if you talk to people in the world, and even amongst us, some people would say, well, it's Islam today. That's the evil power in the world. And in fact, folk, let's face it, there's a drive in the world to make Islam the focus of all the evil that's going on in our world. Terror attacks, mass bombings, where people attach bombs to their body and then blow people up. It's always blamed on Islam. So there is a drive in the world today to make Islam the evil power. And, of course, all the Christians, so to speak, are to unite together. And that would include Catholicism and apostate Protestants and even Seventh-day Adventists. And we're supposed to unite against the common enemy. And the common enemy, we're told, is Islam. Some people say it's the Freemasons. Some people will tell us it's the Jews. I remember in California at a meeting, a very famous Seventh-day Adventist doctor by the name of Lorraine Day. She has multiple videos on the internet. She healed herself from cancer. The lady is brilliant, a brilliant woman. I met her in the back room of before we were going to go on the platform for some meetings, and I was introduced to her, and she said, "Oh, you're the one who wrote that book." And I said, which book are you referring to, ma'am? And she said, The Secret Terrorists. I said, yes, ma'am, I wrote that. And she said, it's too bad, but you are all wrong. Well, that was a nice way to greet somebody. And I said, I'm all wrong. She said, oh, absolutely you are. And I said, okay, maybe you can fill in for me the right then. She said, well, it's obviously the Jews that are controlling the world. Well, I looked at her and I said, well, explain something to me, Doc. I said, who is Babylon the Great of Revelation chapter 17? That controls the politicians and the wealthy and the churches and is involved in creating chaos and war for her ends. Well, at that point, she had to go on the rostrum. She didn't have time to answer me. Folk, you know, this woman's brilliant as far as worldly wisdom is concerned, but she doesn't have a leg to stand on. Some people say it's the CFR. Some say it's communists. Some say it's the Bilderbergers, the international wealthy of the world. But you know what, folk? None of these meet all the criteria for the great whore of Revelation 17. Next slide. There's only one system. Go ahead, sweetie. It'll keep going. Only one system meets all the criteria of Revelation 17. And that, of course, is the papacy. There's no doubt. They're the only one that fulfills every characteristic in those chapters in Revelation 17 and 18. It's interesting, of all of the reformers in the time of the Reformation in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, folk, they agreed on so little. They hardly agreed on anything. But there was one thing that they all agreed on. And that was who the apostate church was in Revelation 17. That they agreed on. Next slide, sweetie. Well, the Bible fills in. Keep going. The Bible fills in for us the great whore of Revelation 17 is connected to the political powers of this world. Revelation 17 verse 2 says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. That would give you an idea that they are equals. The whore and the kings of the earth are equals. But Revelation 17:18 declares, the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. In this verse, it makes it crystal clear that the kings of the earth are not equals with the woman. The woman controls them. The woman tells them what to do. And as long as they do as they are told, they're allowed to stay in office. If they don't, well, John F. Kennedy learned what happened when you don't do what the great whore says. Abraham Lincoln learned what happens. Queen Elizabeth, the first of England, learned what happens. Now, in a Catholic periodical called Western Watchman, June 27, 1912, notice this statement. It's quite amazing and rather arrogant. It says, if the government of the United States were at war with the church, meaning the Catholic Church, we would say tomorrow to hell with the government of the United States. And if the church and all the governments of the world were at war, we would say to hell with all the governments of the world. Why is it the Pope has such tremendous power? Why, the Pope is the ruler of the world. All the emperors, all the kings, all the princes, all the presidents of the world are as these altar boys of mine. I think we're somewhat aware that an altar boy is simply a messenger or a servant of the priest or the cardinal or the bishop. So an altar boy is told by a priest, jump, and the altar boy says, how high? You know, it's not a matter of, well, you know, I am a person and I can make that decision. No, you are absolutely obedient. Now, just this last week, there was a president of a major country that had an audience with the great whore. Barack Obama went to the Vatican. Now, folk, we don't know what was discussed, but I know who was in charge. And I know who told, who gave the orders, and the person who gave the orders was not the President of the United States. These verses tell me so. And this statement from the Catholic Journal tells me so, that the presidents of the world, including the President of the United States, is an altar boy. He does exactly as he is told to do. Next slide, sweetie. No more canosa. Does anybody know what canosa is? You say it's that spaghetti sauce that I put on my noodles this last... No, it's not canosa. Does anybody else want to take a guess? I already got rid of that first one. Does anybody know what it is? Well, in the 11th century, there was a king. His name was Henry. He was the leader of the Holy Roman Empire. And he dared to disobey Pope Gregory VII. So what happened? The Pope Gregory VII told all of Henry's subjects, they said, look, Henry has been disobedient to me. You all have the right to kill him. So what did Henry IV do? Henry IV, with his wife and a few servants, went over the Alps in the dead of winter, and he waited outside in the snow for 3 days before Pope Gregory would see him. He didn't have shoes, and it was freezing cold. Well, do you know where that took place? It was at a castle at a place called Canossa. Place called Canossa. Next slide. Great controversy talks about that. It was Pope Gregory and Henry IV. Go ahead, sweetie. Pope Gregory and Henry IV, in Great Controversy, pages 57 and 58. It was in January of 1077 that Henry waited in the snow for 3 days. It took place at the castle of Canossa. Next slide. You can keep going with that. There's the picture again. So, folk, kings and leaders do what they're told, or else. Or else. And you can find this in every single country throughout the world. When I went to Korea, South Korea, they asked me to do a talk on the Jesuit order and the Catholic Church in South Korea. And you know what? In studying the history of South Korea, they've had leaders killed too. Why? Because they didn't do as they were told. And it's happened in England, it's happened in Germany, it's happened in America, it's happened throughout the world. The reason why the Catholic Church has an idea, it's called the Order of the Divine Right of Kings. And what the Divine Right of Kings simply says is that all leaders are to be in obedience to God. And because the papacy believes that they are God on earth, or the vicar of Christ, therefore every leader is to be in submission to Rome. Now, if a leader understands that and goes along with it, then everything is fine. But if a leader doesn't go along with the divine right of kings, then they are killed and they are destroyed. There was one United States president named William Henry Harrison in 1841 who declared that we do not believe in a government by divine right. Now, he stated that in 1841, and 35 days later, he was dead. He was dead. So, Queen Elizabeth did not believe in the divine right of kings, and because she didn't, there were 12 attempts that were made on her life. And when all of those attempts failed, the papacy sent in the Spanish Armada. To destroy Queen Elizabeth and England. Next slide. Really, Nellie?
I heard him say it on one of the news shows.
Okay.
On Earth.
Sure. Well, I think, Nellie, obviously there is an arrogance, and it's only going to become more and more bold. More and more bold, Nellie. When Elizabeth came to the throne of England, she sent a note to the ambassador in Rome, Richard Crane, to let the people know. She was informed by the Pope that England was a servant of the Holy See, that Elizabeth had no right to assume the crown without his permission, and could not therefore reign over England. Her safest course was to renounce all claims to the throne and submit herself entirely to his will. He would treat her as tenderly as possible. But if she refused his advice, he would not spare her. You see, folk, the problem with Elizabeth, it was twofold. Number one, Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was Henry's second wife. His first wife was Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was a devout Catholic, but Catherine couldn't give Henry VIII any sons. So Henry got rid of Catherine of Aragon, married Anne Boleyn. Well, Anne Boleyn didn't give him any boys either, but she did give him a daughter. And the daughter that Anne Boleyn gave to Henry VIII was Queen Elizabeth. So, Elizabeth, according to the papacy, had no right to rule, and she was unlawfully conceived, therefore had no right to the throne of England. Next slide. So there was going to be a battle that would rage in England. Many attempts were made on her life. When all else failed, you send in the Spanish Armada, and that sailed in 1588. You know, folk, if God had not intervened and crushed the Spanish Armada, it wasn't just Francis Drake and the Sea Dogs of England that stopped the Armada, but there were great storms that crushed many of this incredible fleet of ships. If England had not won that battle, all of America, all of the United States today could very well be like all of Central and South America, where you have a very wealthy group of people and a very poor group of people, where you have no middle class. Oh, it is getting to be that way here, Nellie. Absolutely. And the reason why? Because Rome is being allowed greater and greater control and authority in this country. So, thank God he intervened, destroyed and defeated the Armada, and allowed England to remain Protestant. Next slide. Keep going, sweetie. All right, there we go. The Spanish Armada, 1588. You know what the Pope did was he told Philip II of Spain. Philip II was the son of Charles V, before whom Luther stood at the Diet of Worms in 1521. But you know what? The Pope Sixtus V, he told Philip II of Spain, he said, look, if you land one ship in the Armada on English soil, he said, I'll give you 1,000,000 scudi. Now, I'm not sure exactly how much a scudi was, but it was a lot of money. Well, you know what? not one ship of the Armada landed on English soil. Therefore, Pope Sixtus told Philip, I'm not going to give you a dime. And he didn't. He didn't. Next slide, sweetie. By divine right, the papacy rules the kings of the earth today. If the kings do her bidding, all is well. If they don't, unless God intervenes for their deliverance, they will be cut down one way or another. The Bible declared that the papacy reigns over the kings of the earth. Who are some of those pawns of the papacy today? Next slide. Well, there's two of them, folk. I think we all know who the couple is on the left. This gentleman right here, does somebody know who he is? Putin of Russia, Vladimir Putin of Russia. Both are kings of the earth. Both are told what to do by Rome. You say, oh, but that can't be so because Putin is Russian Orthodox and Barack Obama, he's not Catholic, he's some Protestant. Well, you got to remember, folk, there is such a thing as secret societies. And it doesn't matter what their religious profession is. Barack Obama is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the Council on Foreign Relations was established by the Jesuit order in 1920. And their goal was to be able to control both political parties in America. And they have since about the time of FDR. Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, they're kings of the earth, and according to the Bible, they are controlled by the papacy. They aren't the only ones. We'll take a look at this second point here today, and then we'll close. The Bible also says it's not just the political powers of the earth that Rome controls. They also control the merchants. And the merchants of the earth are those who buy and sell every commodity known to man. Gold and silver and stones and pearls and linen and purple and silk and scarlet and wood, ivory, brass, marble, iron, cinnamon odors, oil, wheat, fine flour, sheep, chariots, slaves, and souls of men. Make no mistake, folk, it's not the sheiks of the Middle East that control the oil. It's controlled by Babylon the Great. And make no mistake, folk, that the horrendous evil of slavery originated with Babylon the Great. Make no mistake. The merchants, Revelation 18:15 says, of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. You see, the wealthy of the earth are not made wealthy because they work hard and because they sweat. It's because they sold themselves to the Roman pontiff. They were made rich by her. If you study Walmart, that's how they were made rich, folk. It wasn't because Sam Walton was some brilliant businessman. That's just not the case. He just about went bankrupt in the 1960s because he was not a good businessman. This is David Rockefeller. The Rockefellers were made rich because they sold their souls to the Vatican. Next slide. It's not just the Rockefellers. It's also the Waltons, Ted Turner. Next slide. It goes on and on and on. Even Bill Gates, he's married to a woman who is a devout Roman Catholic, and that man's billions go into Catholic charities around the world. The world's wealthy remain rich as they are willing to sell their souls to Rome. Revelation 18:15 is clear. The papacy rules the rich. The international bankers go as the papacy bids her. Next slide, sweetie. Let's take a look. What is it? Okay, we'll stop there. God willing, we'll pick up part 2 next week on the other phases of Revelation 17 and 18. You know, I want to close with one passage in Revelation 17:14. So far, we've seen the political powers of earth and we've seen the world's wealthy. Revelation 17:14 declares, "These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful." You see, folk, the picture in Revelation 17 and 18 is a war that's raging between the forces of the world with organized religion from Rome, the political powers, the financial powers. Folk, they're warring against Christ today. That's who they're warring against. And I'm so thankful today that it says that they are making war against Christ and against those who are called and chosen and faithful. By God's grace, folk, we'll make a recommitment this morning to Jesus that we want to follow him. In spite of all the machinery in this world to oppose the truth of God will triumph at last.